And our top focus, former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott joined us on NewsX World and weighed in on the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, urging for a swift and fair end to the conflict. Abbott highlights the massive toll on both civilian and military lives and warns of significant global economic disruption, particularly in countries reliant on Ukrainian grains. He believes the war must end soon, but stresses that any peace must be based on fairness. Abbott also emphasizes the need for meaningful security guarantees if Ukraine is forced to give up territory to Russia. He believes foreign troops, particularly Indian forces, could act as effective deterrents and ensure lasting peace. Abbott praises Ukrainian President Zelensky for his leadership, saying he's been extraordinary in wartime. However, Abbott also recognizes the difficulty of holding elections during a conflict. As for Europe's sanctions on Russia, Abbott supports their continuation as long as Russia's aggression persists. Let's listen into what the former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott had to say to NewsX World.
It would be good for everyone if this war could end, because not only has the war caused massive casualties in Ukraine, civilian casualties as well as military ones, not only has the war caused massive losses to the Russian armed forces, but it's caused significant economic disruption all around the world, particularly in countries which are dependent upon Ukrainian grains for their food supply. So the sooner we can end this war, the better, but it's got to end on a fair basis. I think that put him in a league of his own when it comes to wartime leadership. It certainly made him stand out as the complete opposite to the leaders of Afghanistan, who were happy to flee the country in a helicopter with a bag of cash once the Taliban were advancing on their capital. So I think that President Zelensky has demonstrated enormous personal courage. I think he's demonstrated enormous political integrity. And I think the success of his country in holding off this much larger Russian attack for over 3 years now testifies to the quality of his leadership.
Interesting points raised there by Tony Abbott. Joining me on the broadcast is Marian Duras, foreign affairs expert. I also have with me Andrea Lucidi, war reporter, joining us from Russian Donbass region. Let me begin this conversation with Andrea Lucidi. Andrea Lucidi, I want to understand from your perspective, Tony Abbott has spoken about the possible role that could be played by countries such as India in putting an end to the Russia-Ukraine war. What are your thoughts on the same?
Well, from the Russian point of view, it's not Russia is not hostile to speak about the possibility to a deploy of a possible peacekeeping force in Ukraine, if this force is made by soldiers from countries that are not in the NATO and are not from countries that are supporting one of the two parts in the conflict. India, for example, have maintained during these years a neutral position. The leadership of India always spoke about peace, about the necessity of diplomacy in this conflict. And for this reason, the position of India is, from my point of view, very good for a possible work with Russia and Ukraine for a peace deal, of course.
Mr. Lucidi, at the same time, I want to understand from your perspective, when Anthony Abbott talks about peace should be based on fairness, what could that possibly mean? When we talk about a peace deal that will be fair, what does that look like for the world?
Well, we have two different positions in this conflict, of course. There is the Ukrainian position where Zelensky is spoken always about the necessity for Ukraine to join in the NATO, to have security guarantee from the US and from the European partners. And at the opposite side, we have the Russian request about permanent neutrality of Ukraine, the necessity that Ukraine will not join the NATO, because for Russia, for the Russian leadership, the presence of Ukraine in the NATO bloc is one of the main reasons, because the conflict was exploded in 2022. And many times the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, and the spokesman of Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov, say that Russia is available to speak about a peace deal, but this is for speak about peace, it's necessary from the Russian side to have complete all the objective that they have in the military operation. For the report that we have from the Russian Ministry of Defense, they say that the objectives are almost completed, but the main question on the table still the joining of Ukraine in NATO. And till the Ukrainian leadership will not leave this idea, I think will be very, very difficult to speak about peace. But in this day, we saw that the envoy of Vladimir Putin, Kirill Dmitriev, is in Washington, and he said in Washington yesterday that he spoke with some official from the Trump administration about a normalization of the relationship between US and Russia. And I think this is a very big progress for the way to have a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia.
Okay, Mr. Lucidi, thank you so much for joining us. Let me also bring into the conversation Marian Duris at this point in time. Marian Duris, Anthony Abbott, when speaking to NewsX World, spoke about the continuation of European sanctions against Russia. Have those sanctions really proven to be effective?
Yes, when you mentioned effectiveness of these sanctions, yeah, when it was first time proposed, this anti-Russia sanctions, so there was said, and there was some kind of declaration that these sanctions will stop the war, will break the Russian economy. So this was rhetoric, these was statements of European leaders. In the end, we don't see results like this. We see the war is continuing. Russian economics is doing quite in standard way, it's normal way, it's not breaking down. So in this sense, effectiveness of the sanctions is not very good. Of course, sanctions have some influence. It's for sure. Yes, so Russian economics is hurting in some ways, and yes, it's a tool what can be used in discussions between United States and Russia, and maybe between Europe and Russia. But I would like to see more effort from European leaders to talk with Russia about these things, about possible relations in the future, about stopping the war, and what are interests and goals of both sides in this sense. So don't just not let this discussion on the American side and Russian side. On the other side, we see European leaders make some own formats, own summits about Ukraine and its war. I think European leaders should do more. What about discussion between all actors, who are participating on this situation and this tragic war?
Marian Duris, I also want to understand from you, in the present global scenario, if there are countries that must join the mediation process, what names would you propose would be best in terms of bringing both Russia and Ukraine to the table for discussions?
I think this is very good signal when we see discussions between United States and Russia, because I consider these two sides or two parties like the most influential and the most significant in this situation. So Europe, okay, Europe has a different perspective in this sense, but I think we should appreciate effort of Donald Trump, willingness of Kremlin's or Russian administration to discuss. And of course, we should appreciate as well Middle East countries who provide so good environment for these discussions. And yes, so we should appreciate it. And as I said before, I think more actors in international environment should participate to this kind of discussions, because it's not only about Ukraine. It's discussion how will sovereignty or territorial integrity will look like in the future, how big powers will act in the international relations. So this is very important discussion what we should participate, and not just let it on the United States and Russia.
All right, Mr. Juris, thank you so much for joining us on NewsX World. We leave it there.